Hi, this is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, joined by Sheldon Richmond, the foundation's vice president. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show, as you know, that brings you the libertarian perspective on the current issues of the day, the perspective that we all know you're not going to get in the mainstream media, and especially not on the mainstream television networks. We're going to talk about our big conference that we have this weekend, actually our conference within a conference. There is a great big conference that's being held by the Students for Liberty. It's their annual conference. Last year they had around 1,400 students. This year they're expecting about 1,600. We're hoping to add to that because of the program we've put together. What we did is we bought a sponsorship. We got a grant to enable us to do this from a generous donor. And we're calling it a conference within a conference. And while most of the talks will probably deal mostly with economic issues at the overall conference, we wanted to bring the critical importance of civil liberties and the infringements on civil liberties and privacy that the national security state has done to the American people and really to the people of the world, to the vision of these students, to raise their vision to the critical importance of this aspect of libertarianism. And so as part of that process, we have 7 presentations that we're doing there. And they consist of presentations by libertarians as well as by liberals. That is, those liberals that have remained consistent in their defense of civil liberties and their opposition to the dark side that the national security state has taken us. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the conference, why we are doing this, why we felt it was important to do this at this conference. Sheldon, my feeling is this, is that, you know, we all get into this into libertarianism. I think most of us get into libertarianism because of the economic issues. It's natural because, you know, the welfare state, the regulated economy, economic interventionism has caused so much damage and destruction to people, especially poor people, minimum wage laws and so forth that lock them out of the labor market. But over the years, after I discovered libertarianism back in the late 70s, I started to realize that there was another dimension to this that libertarians don't focus a lot of attention on, and that was the warfare state. So we have the welfare state on one side of the federal government, we got the warfare state on the other. And I came to the conclusion that the warfare state is the much bigger threat to our freedom and well-being than the welfare state is. And then once I reached that conclusion, which I think was confirmed by 9/11 and all the ugliness that has come out of 9/11, I think that it's vitally important that we move our nation in a different direction with respect to warfare principally, and secondarily the welfare state. What do you think?
Yeah, I think in doing this and refocusing attention on war and civil and the price in terms of civil liberties, not to mention the other horrible price paid in terms of war, we're really harking back to an earlier generation of libertarians. If you look at what the libertarians of the turn of the 19th, 20th century were up to, we're really just rediscovering what they were doing. The U.S. First great imperialist adventure, you know, outside of the continent of North America was the Spanish-American War, where the U.S. beat Spain, its aging empire, and took control of Puerto Rico and the Philippines, Guam. And there was an anti-imperialist league that was formed that had some rather luminary people, Mark Twain and others, and outright libertarians like William Graham Sumner, a very well-known sociologist at Yale University, who wrote an immortal essay that every libertarian should read called "The Conquest of the United States by Spain." This was after the war, and of course the ironic title was even though the United States triumphed over Spain militarily, the values of the Spanish Empire had conquered the United States. The United States was now an empire and was committed to being an empire. And of course, there was a brutal put down of a resistance by the Filipinos that was cheered by people like Teddy Roosevelt and other jingoists and warmongers, but appalled the libertarian types of the day. So we're really just reviving a tradition that unfortunately was allowed to sort of fade out. And we're fanning the flames, and I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you went back to those early days because, I think it's even important that we go back to the founding principles of this country, which were anti-imperialist. Our American ancestors who were British citizens, they rebelled a government that was an empire. They opposed imperialism, and they established a constitutionally limited government republic. They were fiercely against standing armies. They understood that standing armies have always been the biggest threat to the freedom and well-being of people. They strongly believed in gun control and a private citizenry able to come to the defense of their country if necessary. And so they didn't buy all this militarism, imperialism, and as you point out, one of the major turning points, at least in the turn toward empire, was the Spanish-American War. And when you talked about, suppressing the Philippines, it was a brutal suppression. This is where the American troops started waterboarding people, and they killed untold amounts of people. I forget how many, but tens of thousands of people who wanted nothing more than just to establish their own independent country. And the U.S. said, no, we freed you from the Spanish Empire, but only so that now you will remain under our dominion and control. And they were doing the same thing with Cuba, that they had freed from the Spanish Empire. And then all of a sudden now you have this more than a century-long obsession with Cuba. That's going on today with the embargo and so forth. And so this moved America in a totally opposite direction. A lot of Americans don't realize that. This move toward empire where we have troops in over 1,000 countries. An empire of bases, as Chalmers Johnson put it. And you've got a policing the world. You got people angry and hateful toward us, resulting in this constant threat of terrorism, including the 9/11 attacks and the attack on the USS Cole and the 93 attack on the World Trade Center, which they then used to take away our freedoms. And so it is imperative that we recapture, as you say, the spirit of what it once meant to be an American. And that spirit was totally antithetical to what the U.S. government does today.
Well, I think we could go back, of course, before the Spanish-American War, and you're right about Cuba. I left that out of my list. I knew I was skipping something there. Cuba was, of course, very important. But before that, of course, the U.S. meddled in Hawaii, eventually acquired Hawaii as a territory. That's why the American fleet was there at Pearl Harbor. That was an American base. But we can go back way before that even. And while institutionally and rhetorically there seemed to be a anti-imperialist sentiment, we really can't overlook what the settlers and the U.S. government did to the Indians, and that qualifies as imperialism in my view. They pushed the Indians out of their homes, pushed them westward, constantly putting them in camps, which I think easily qualifies concentration camps when they weren't outright slaughtering them. So that was an attempt to conquer the continent, and it seems to me that's where you find the beginnings of imperialism. There were always designs on Canada, which they never managed to pull off, but there were certainly times when the U.S. government was ready to go and conquer Canada. There was this idea of manifest destiny, that that destiny had pointed the Americans to first of all to conquer the entire continent, and then of course be master of the world. So that was always in the back of a lot of people's minds, a lot of influential people's minds. Not everybody's. There were people that certainly did resist it. So it is entirely right for libertarians to put this at the top of the agenda, and that's why I think what FFF is doing is so important, and this conference is just part of that.
Yeah, well, your point about Hawaii is very well taken. One of our speakers, in fact, addressed that Stephen Kinzer in his book Overthrow. And Kinzer's been absolutely fantastic in detailing the history of U.S. imperialism and regime change operations, especially by the CIA. But he goes back to the Hawaii intervention, as you pointed out. He's talked about Guatemala, where the U.S., through the CIA, ousted the democratically elected president of the country and installed a brutal military dictatorship and a succession of military regimes that threw the country into a civil war that lasted 3 decades, killed around 1 million people. Before that, there was the Iranian regime change operation, where they ousted the democratically elected prime minister, Mossadegh, and installed the brutal Shah that ultimately led to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And so Ken's going to be talking about his newest book, which has received widespread acclaim, called The Brothers, about Alan Dulles and J. Foster Dulles and the role that they played after World War II, in terms of the imperialism, the interventionism, the regime change operations, the assassination attempts, all in the name of fighting the communists who were supposedly coming to get us. And I ought to mention, World War I and World War II, it always befuddled me when I was growing up and I'd hear about World War II, and that after the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor, they also attacked U.S. troops in the Philippines. And I couldn't understand what in the world were U.S. troops doing in the Philippines until I realized much later, having discovered libertarianism, that the Philippines were part of this imperial conquest from the Spanish-American War. That's why there were American troops there.
Yeah, you're right. Americans don't really learn much about this. They will learn something about the Spanish-American War, but some positive spin is attempted for the U.S. becoming a Pacific power. This is usually presented in the schools as a good thing, as a step forward, as a final, defeat for the isolationists, or the people that oppose this are always smeared as isolationists, somehow xenophobes. Apparently it's xenophobia if you don't want to rule foreigners. That makes you xenophobe. I guess if you like foreigners, you want to rule them, but if you hate foreigners, you want nothing to do with them, except trade, perhaps. So it's very silly. It's all turned upside down. But that's what people learn in school, and most Americans know zilch about foreign policy. They don't know that much about domestic either, but even less about foreign policy. They don't care about it. It's far away. It's people, not like us, so we don't really need to worry about them. Terrible things go on, and most people have no idea of it. It's not just that they know about it and don't care. They don't even know about it, but they don't even care to know about it. They shut it out, and if you look at how foreign policy is discussed in the typical political campaign, it's a complete waste of time. It's all lies and spin and theatrical attempts to create emotional effects in people, but there's hardly ever any substance. And if you look at the discussions on television, same thing. So people are living in perpetual darkness, Americans are, about what goes on. The problem is the people that suffer the brunt of U.S. policy know fully what's going on, and they don't like it. And they're upset that Americans don't even seem to care about it. So while they may distinguish the government from the people in most cases, I think they also realize the people are apathetic and don't give a darn and don't do anything to change it. Even if there was some easy way to change it, Americans don't even attempt that. So part of our job is to just wake people up to care about this in the first place. Terrible things are done in their name. It's about time they understood.
Well, and terrible things are done to us, to our freedom and privacy here in the United States. But, these things go back. They're like a progression. That where we are today stretches all the way back to the Spanish-American War. There's World War I. We're still living with that. They're going after these leakers with the Espionage Act of World War I. If there was ever a horrible, destructive, unnecessary war for Americans to get involved with, it was World War I. What was the purpose? To make the world safe for democracy. Oh, for one thing, democracy isn't even in the Constitution. You had troops dying for this ridiculous cause overseas, or the war to end all wars. Was that ludicrous? And then, of course, World War II was just a continuation of World War I. And as we've pointed out here at FFF, Roosevelt provoked the Japanese into attacking in order to get into World War II, which Americans wanted nothing to do with after the fiasco that World War I was all about. And let's face it, Sheldon, we've been addressing these issues from the very inception of FFF. Our very first year, we had an issue of our journal, Future of Freedom, that was called Freedom Daily, entirely devoted to the vital importance of civil liberties. And that's what goes with these interventions. You end up losing civil liberties, which is really the linchpin of a free society. We live under a regime that's exercising totalitarian powers, the power to assassinate Americans and foreigners too, unrestrained power, unreviewable power, the power to round us up like they did with Jose Padilla, torture us, and put us in concentration camps, hold us indefinitely as enemy combatants, and of course foreigners too. These are attributes of a totalitarian nation. Massive surveillance schemes, spying on us secretly, and then getting angry because we've learned about it. I mean, this has nothing to do with a free society, and as you put it, this is why we have to keep raising people's vision, making them aware that this apparatus that exists, this huge military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower pointed out, and who pointed out the grave threat to our democratic processes that this thing was. A secret intelligence force, the CIA, the NSA, spying on everybody, not just foreign leaders, but regular, normal American citizens without warrants. This is not what a free society is all about. And you're right. This is what we have to keep, ringing people's bell of how important this is. If you want a free society, this type of apparatus is inconsistent with that.
Well, if Americans don't care what happens to foreigners, maybe they'll care what happens to themselves. I don't see any huge uprising and outcry about the NSA. The polls are not exactly overwhelmingly against this, and people have pretty much gone about the business. So we still have more work to do. It's every dystopian novel and movie, of course, has government doing comprehensive spying on its population. So it's all that the spying has always been associated with bad things, and fiction writers have certainly perceived this. Orwell's 1984 being one of the great examples, perhaps the greatest example. But where are people getting upset? I mean, it seems to me they're too easily disarmed when other people say, well, Google gathers information on you too, as if there's a big no difference between the government spying on you, so it has the potential to arrest you and imprison you, versus Google, which is gathering some information which you've released, of course, in order that it can tailor ads to you. Now, you may not like that, and there are ways to turn that off, but it's hardly the same thing. So there's hardly the same danger that the government represents. So the fact that you find pundits and other apologists for the spying minimizing it by saying, well, it's no different from Google or Yahoo, just shows you how slavish some people are to this power. And also look at the attitude toward Glenn Greenwald and other people. I mean, there was a conversation in Congress the other day between Mike Rogers, the head of the House Intelligence Committee, and James Comey, head of the FBI, about whether Greenwald is a criminal, whether Greenwald has been fencing stolen material. They now want to, it sounds like, define journalists who get paid for their work as basically fencing, because it's stolen. Number one, they regard it as stolen material. Number two, by getting paid by their employer or being a freelancer and getting paid, I guess that means they got paid to pass along stolen material, and that's like someone stealing jewels from a private owner and going down to the local pawn shop and fencing it. First of all, I challenge the idea that it's stolen material. If it's taken from the government, well, under the theory we're the government, then it's not stolen. The government, in fact, has been withholding it from us. We're supposedly the owners and the boss. So I challenge the idea that it's even stolen material. So yes, we have our work cut out for us, and hopefully we can ring the alarm and wake people up to what's going on.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point about Americans being submissive and acquiescent to a lot of this stuff, and that raises a fascinating question of why. Why is it that they can't see that these are things that our American ancestors would never have tolerated, that they brought into existence a nation in which these types of things were not supposed to exist? And I think my hunch is that it's this perpetual quest for security and safety. Is that people just want to be made to feel like they're safe, like the government's taking care of them. And so a crisis is government's best friend. because in a crisis, people get scared, they get frightened, and their natural inclination is, please protect me, please take care of me. And on the economic side, please provide me my welfare, please take care of me here on my food and my housing and so forth. But on the warfare state side, there's a terrorist strike, and it's like, oh, do whatever you think's necessary. I don't care what you have to do. As compared to saying, do what you think's necessary, but don't even think about taking away my freedom, because my freedom is first and foremost. That's a constant. You're not going to do that. You can do whatever you think's necessary to protect my freedom, but don't take it away. There's no balancing here. And I think that's what happened after 9/11, after a long progression, during the Cold War, where people were willing to defer to the state and defer to the national security apparatus, saying, oh, the communists are coming to get us. And the apparatus really preyed on that. The communists are coming to get you. We're the only thing standing here. Keep funding us. Keep having this giant military industrial complex, and we'll keep you safe. Well, this battle's been going on for as long as there's been government. I mean, that's what Franklin was talking about when he said that those who give up their freedom for security don't deserve either one. And the fact is, you don't get either one. You lose your freedom, and you also lose your security, because your government is the biggest threat. That's where the roundups come in, the spying. As you point out, there's a fundamental difference between the government gathering information and Google or Macy's or whatever, because the government does bad things to you. It rounds you up, it herds you into concentration camps, and it uses the information that it acquires to decide who are the ones that need to be rounded up. It's always been historically the case, including here. With the roundup of the Japanese Americans, a case that's never been overruled, and which, as Justice Scalia recently said, could easily happen again. And that's why we keep raising people's vision, is that this is not the apparatus that formed the foundation of this country. Cold War is over. Regardless of what you think about the Cold War, whether it was necessary or not, all this junk, that's over. It's time to get rid of that junk and restore the principles of a free society.
Yeah, well, it was H.L. Mencken who said that what government does, what it's so good at, is keeping the populace perpetually alarmed about some hobgoblin, which of course then makes the people compliant and accepting of anything the politicians want to do. I guess we have to say that Thomas Hobbes, after all these centuries, is the most influential political philosopher that ever was. Because it was Hobbes who taught that it's only government that stands between us and complete chaos and war of all against all and all the terrible things that people are afraid of. Other people knew better. John Locke, Thomas Paine understood that actually wasn't the case. Chaos is not what. There's a good bit of order, as Paine put it. A good bit of the order that we observe in society is the result of people understanding there's benefits to that order. And so the government, of course, likes to build on that and plays on these Hobbesian fears. I mean, most people maybe couldn't tell you who Thomas Hobbes was or what the Leviathan was and never read it. But nevertheless, they're good Hobbesians who are willing to turn over nearly all of their freedom if you just promise them safety.
Yeah, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't tell how this happened. I mean, conservatives, when 9/11 comes along and George W. Bush is president, conservatives sold us down the river. I mean, let's face it. And we kept saying as libertarians, don't surrender our freedoms to the government. That just don't make that trade. Don't trade away our freedom for the pretense of security. And conservatives said, oh, you can trust George W. Bush with these omnipotent powers. He'll keep us safe. He'll keep us, take care of us. And so they surrendered him the power to round people up, torture them, including Americans, assassinate them. And now we're faced with, now we got 8 years of Obama wielding these powers, but it looks increasingly possible that Hillary Clinton may be president. And so, like I wrote in a recent op-ed or a blog post, thank you, conservatives. Thanks for the nice job of trading away our freedom to a president who may be Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton's wife, wielding these omnipotent powers. And that's why we kept saying, don't trade away our freedom to anybody, no matter how trustworthy he is. Imagine that the person who's wielding these powers is your worst enemy. But liberals are no better. I mean, they talked a good game during the Bush administration, and then Obama comes in, and boy, they threw in the towel, and they sealed their lips and stopped objecting to what the government was doing. Now, that's not all liberals. And Glenn Greenwald's a notable example. And we have some liberals speaking at our conference. We had them speaking at our conferences in 2007 and 2008. But these were the principled liberals. They're not with us on economics. We understand that. But on civil liberties, the war on terrorism, assassination, roundups, concentration camps, we're on the same page. And so I thought I'd mention our speakers. There's Jonathan Turley, George Washington University law professor, done fantastic work in the area of civil liberties. Stephen Kinzer, I mentioned earlier. Jamil Jaffer with the ACLU. The ACLU has been fantastic in the defense of civil liberties in the context of the war on terrorism and the foreign interventionist foreign policy. Bob Higgs, one of my heroes, author of Crisis and Leviathan, fantastic book. John Glazer, who used to be with antiwar.com, writes great columns in the Washington Times and other publications. He's going to be on a panel with Scott Horton, who's got a radio show that has the greatest collection of interviews of anti-war types and pro-civil liberties types that has, I think, ever existed. And then we've got our fantastic, we've got you and me. We're going to do the Libertarian Angle live there at the show with special guest Bob Higgs. And then we've got our fantastic panel with Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick, his collaborator on the Showtime series Untold History. Jeremy Scahill, whose movie Dirty Wars just got nominated for an Academy Award. It's being moderated by the vice chairman of the museum in D.C., Shelby Coffey. So we got ourselves an all-star lineup, and you can still come to this conference. It's $50 for the whole conference, not just for our segment, but for the entire conference. And so there's got a lot of other great talks, especially by other free market libertarian foundations. And then you've got our panel there in the main ballroom. So we're doing our very best to raise the vision of these students, Sheldon. I can't imagine how we can come up with a much better program than what we'll put together here.
No, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to seeing these people. Some of them I've met, some I've not met, but they're heroes of mine, and the whole conference is going to be quite a spectacle. So I'm looking forward to meeting the students and the speakers and having a couple days in D.C. It should be a great experience.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've learned about, people, about hanging out with students and so forth, you get your batteries charged up. I mean, they're infused with enthusiasm. They're very well educated. Not all of them. I mean, some of them are just getting into it. That's why they come to a conference like this. But boy, you can walk around and people are discussing Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek and Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman. And then hopefully we're going to be having them starting to discuss the critical importance of civil liberties and the warfare state and how this is a much greater threat than the drug war and the welfare state and so forth. And so, we're looking forward to it. It's not limited to students. I mean, granted, most of the audience will be students, but, and by the way, we've sent out notices to all the universities, or most of the universities here in the D.C. area, to the political science departments, and we're hoping to attract a lot of liberal students that will come over to the conference, mingle with the libertarian students. I'm sure there'll be some conservatives there too. But I mean, we're definitely, we're mixing choir and non-choir, and we're trying to get a much bigger audience to expose people, obviously, to the economic side, which will be the rest of the conference, but also this critical importance of civil liberties. And so again, if you haven't registered and you think you might want to come to this thing, we'd love to have you. It's $50. You can come to our website at fff.org. We've got information about it there. You You register at the Students for Liberties site, and again, it's $50. You'll never find a better deal than that. And so we hope you can make it. But in any event, we'll be reporting back to you probably in the next Libertarian Angle about how the conference went, what went on, and some of the highlights of it. So anyway, thanks. That's this week's Libertarian Angle. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.